So here, so whatever we have discussed so far in our last slide, that we are going to demonstrate here. So how to solve that challenge. So let's take one hypothetical situation. The question is, what if you have a container that is stateful like MySQL that needs DB. It stores databases and reads from database. Just imagine, of course, if you have a database, let's take one example. It would be much clearer. Let's take a WordPress application. So WordPress application, the backend for the WordPress application is SQL database. So in that you can log into that WordPress application and you can write your blogs. Okay, for past 1 month you have written 15 blogs. Okay, you have written 15 blogs. Now after the 1 month you thought like I will add a few more additions to user interface so that you have added those modules to your source code. Now you want to upgrade, you want to roll the updates of new features into your WordPress. So how will you do that? You will go to the server and you will stop the container and you will remove the container, and then you will remove the image also. Then you will with the updated source code you will build a new image, and then you will spin a new container out of the new build image. Okay, everything is fine, brilliant, super. But the issue here is, what happens to that 15 blocks that you have written? You tell me. Yeah, tell me, Ray. What happens to that? It will go. It will. It will completely gone. It will be gone completely. You won't find. Yes, you won't find. You'll never find, because that will be inside the MySQL database. The MySQL database is inside the container. So if you remove the container, if you delete the container, your blocks will be gone. So how to solve this? Imagine this is 15. If it is 1000, what will you do? That's where the pain comes. That's where the Docker offers few solutions. So one of that, to solve this kind of issues, so Docker has come up with two types of solutions. One is volume mount, second one is bind mount. So the issue here is, it these the data in the container does not persist for a longer time, and rollover, if moreover it will be difficult to get the data from the container. So if you are using it, so like you are making code changes, like the same example that I have seen told, right? And we have seen it in the separate uh, directory. So it stores its data, so it's tightly coupled with that directory file system structure. So if you want to move the data somewhere else, it's very difficult. Or like, see, you may say that now, okay, we'll do one thing before we stop, and before we remove the container, we will copy all the data and we'll put it in your host machine. No, that's a container. It's very difficult, very difficult to transfer all the data. Forget about the difficulty. It's impossible. We cannot do that. So that is the reason we should have a ways to do that. Those are the ways. So we have two options to persist the data, to make to make the data persistence, that is volume mount and then bind mount. So what is volume mount? So volume mount is very simple. So we Docker will create an directory of directory where data can be stored. Okay, this is called volumes. And how how will it create? It will create when we have to say Docker volumes and give the volume name. When you say this is gonna create a volume directory inside the, I'll show that also, ls cd var lib docker. You see that volumes directory. Let me bring this up here. Let me keep it here. So you could see that volumes directory. When you say docker volumes, create volume and create a volume name, then that volume will be created inside the here inside this volumes directory. It's gonna create. So that is one way. So the location will be decided. The location is default. You cannot have the location wherever you want. The location is remains same. That is var lib and docker volumes. Here you will have your volume. At this part you will have your volumes. Okay, this is called volume mount. This will be handled by the docker only. So that is one way. And the second way is pretty simple. So uh, wherever you want to store the data from the container continuously, so what you have to do is you will create your directory, make dir inside your host machine, and then map that exact directory. That's absolute path. You have to give absolute path of directory with the directory of the container from where you want to collect the data continuously. That's it. These are the two tabs. The first one is default volumes, and it will be handled by the docker, and here everything is done manually. Wherever you want, you can create your directory. So these are the two types of uh, volume mounts we have. So these are the two ways to make data persistence. In addition to that, we have two more ways that we are going to discuss in next slide, but for now we are going to demonstrate these two things. So that's the reason. So let's do the bind mount first. So but before that, I want to tell one more thing. So for us, if you take the volumes now, so whatever data you store in a container at separate directory, you will attach it to a directory, the volumes directory. So all the data from the container directory will be going to the volumes, which is in our host machine, that is in var lib docker volumes. So it's safe on our, the data will be safe on our host machine. So all the volumes will be in this location only, var lib docker volumes. Whereas bind mount, if you see the bind mount, this is mostly used when you want to make changes to the container data. Okay, this is bind mount. The best example for the bind mount would be if you want to change the source code continuously. Okay, so in that case, you can put your data here, or you want to get some data continuously from there. So in that case, it will be good. So like, and this is mostly when you want to make changes to container data, you can do it from your host machine directory, and this will be reflecting into your container directory. So you can select any directory from your host machine and map it. So by the way, as I have told you, volume is also similar. The volume mount is also similar, but the volume is managed directly by the Docker, but it will put the directory in this var lib docker volumes. So if you take the best use cases, let me check the best use case for volume mount is database. Perfect to store a database. Okay, whereas for bind mount, the best use case is to write, to do the changes in source code of of in the source code of application. Okay, you will do the changes in our host machine. You will do the changes in our host machine that will be reflected in the container. That's the best case. Will do the changes in host machine host machine of host machine where where the where the directory the directory which is binded with the container directory. So in host machine, and that will be reflected inside the container. So in that way you can update your source code there. Okay, these are the best two ways. And now let's do our experiments. Our first example we're going to consider is bind mount. Okay, we will start with bind mount. In this persistent data, the first example we will do is bind mount. Let's begin with bind mounts experiment. So now let's get into the instance. Okay, docker server sudo I and clear the screen. So if you see here, now first we are going to see bind mount. So we will specify a directory path in our host machine that will be mapped with the container directory. So the container, because we are using, okay, let me write that, it would be much clearer for you guys. So okay, service database that we are going to use is database, that is MySQL. This is the container I'm gonna use. And so container directory where data stored would be where, this is inside the container, where lib MySQL, obviously MySQL. So this is what, okay, this is the information about a container. So now, so with this information, so the first step should be to create, because it's a bind mount, so we have to create a bind mount directory. That's it. After that you have to spin a container with bind mount mapping. That's it, it's that simple. So let's do that now. So first what I will do is I will pull the image first into my, so at this moment no images are there, yes. So now I'll pull the image first, docker pull, and this is kubectl and MySQL version 1. So I'm pulling this image. Once the image has been pulled, then yes, docker images. So now we have our image. Now let's execute our steps first one by one. So let's create our bind mount. So where do you want to create your bind mount? I will create now where I am, pwd. So I'm in a, okay, / root user. I will do ls. So snap, nothing else is there. So only snap. So I will create directory here, make dir, and then the directory name is bind mount directory. Dir is more than bind mount directory. So let me click enter, ls. So now let me get the pwd, sorry, cd bind mount dir ls pwd. Okay, so this is what is my bind mount directory. Let me copy this and I'll put it here. After that we can use that. So our bind mount directory is this. Okay, so now we have image, we have our bind mount directory. So now I want to attach. So in this, at this moment, nothing is there. I'll check it, nothing is there. So I want to make this directory space, I want to map this directory space with the container where lib mysql, so that all the data which is there inside that will be stored here, and if you do any changes here, that will also be reflected there. That's the main point of doing all those things, so that you can keep the data persistence, so that when you kill the container, data will not go away, data will not die. We need data. Without data, world will not exist. It's not, it's an understated, underrated statement, but that's the fact. Okay, now it's time to spin our container. So what I'm gonna say is docker run, and name of the container I'm gonna give is SQL database, or simply SQL DB. And after the SQL DB, so here we have to mention, we'll run it in detached mode, but that's fine. So after that, we have to mention the environment variable, that is root user or super user password. Without that, it's impossible to basically run a SQL database. Okay, so as I was saying, uh, if if you do not mention, if you do not attach a environment variable, the MySQL root password environment variable, we cannot start MySQL container. So if you have a doubt, let's do that without environment variable, and we'll see what's going to happen. So detached mode, and then p port mapping. Then after that, I will map 3030 of host with 3306 of container, and let's do that. Volumes also I'm not going to add at this moment. We'll do that. We'll just for the testing purpose. And the name of the image is Q Charan MySQL version 1. So image has been built, but let's check. Docker, sorry, container has been spun. So let me check docker ps. There is no container. You see, here the container was spun, container was spun here, but here you could not see the container. So let me check docker ps option here. Now you see the container, but it is in exited state. It is in exited state. You can see that. Let me show that again. It is in exited state. Why? Because let's check why. Let's check. So docker logs and SQL database. See, directly they were saying the problem is you need to specify one of the following as an environment variable, either MySQL root password, or MySQL allow empty password, or MySQL random root password. Either of these three you have to mention as environment variable, or else it will never consider. So or else it will never start our database. So that's the reason. Now we will do that with the environment variable as well as with the bind mode. Okay, let me clear the screen. Now we will write it again. Docker run name. Okay, sorry, before that let me delete that. Docker rm SQL db. So now docker ps option here, yeah, gone. Now let's build it. Now let's spin it. Docker run name SQL db, and we'll put version 1 this time, and option D, detached mode, and option E, that is environment variable, that is my SQL root password, and password I'll give pass wd, just pass wd, nothing else, or else a password only. It would be much simpler. Okay, then so environment variable password has been given. So now port mapping, same we will take 3030 map with 3306. Then let's do the bind mount now. So for bind mount we have to use volume flag or v flag or volume option, and then let's give what's our bind mount directory. It is /root and bind mount dir. Yes, this is the one, correct? Root bind mount dir. So this should be mapped with, I have shown you, I have written, I will show you that. This should be mapped with var container directory, var lib mysql. Okay, I will paste it here for the mapping. Yes, correct, exact. So now let us give the image name now. All done, all set. Let's give the image name. qcharan /mysql version 1. So let me execute it and we will see that. Yes, our container has been spun. Now let's do docker ps. Yes, absolutely, brilliantly, fantastically, it's running. No issue at all. It's running. It is running. It is running. Okay. It's up. The status is up and running. That's the status. So now, so we're gonna do the checking now. Let's check the directory that we have mapped with container. Let's see the magic. Of course, we are inside that directory only. You see that before it was completely empty, if you remember. Now I will do ls. See the magic. See the magic. See the magic. That's what is called bind mount. This is what we call it as a bind mount. So you should see all the data from MySQL, that's container, MySQL container, from the data which is there in var lib MySQL has been copied to this container. Okay, you might have doubt whether it's been copied from there or something in between. This guy might have done something else in between. No, I will show you that also. I will prove you that also. Okay, just give me a second, I'll prove it. So now I'll do docker exec to that container. Docker exec I interactive t terminal tty. Then what's the container name? Container name we gave SQL DBS. Yeah, SQL DB. Then I will use bin bash. I think yes. So bash 4.4. So it has taken bin bash. Now let me do ls. What is there? Okay, pwd first. It's a root directory. So but which directory we want? To which directory we have mapped it? Here it is. We have mapped it to var lib mysql. Whatever is there in this directory should be stored in host machine of root bin bind mount dir. Yes, so let me do cd to that. Now I am inside the container. Okay, cd inside the container. Now let me say enter. and now we will do ls. You see that? exact files, exact files, exact files. The color coding is not there because the container is miniature Ubuntu. The container is miniature Linux distribution, so that's the reason the color coding level of utility is not there in that. So that's why you can see this way only, but the file names remain same. ca.pem, c exactly, even the coding ib, exactly it's been copied. Okay, now let me create a touch file 1 to 10.txt. ls, you got 10 files, huh? Now let's exit out of the container and we'll see. Let's do ls. Here is the magic. See, see the magic. Now we are inside the bind mount directory. You can see that, you can compare that. Before it was bash 4.4, but now this is root, because I have exited from the container and I have entered inside the, I came back to the root directory of our Docker server or Ubuntu server, and inside that you got all the files exactly. So we will do other way around, because I have told you, what did I tell you? What did I tell you? The best use case for bind mount is this. Okay, if if you do any changes to your source code, that can be reflected inside the container so that it can automatically update it as a feature. Okay, so now we are going to add some Python modules here. So touch py Python modules. So ls, so the files has been added to this. So now let us cross check. Let me do ls one more time. So the files has been the modules that you want to change inside our container, that those modules has been added to our host machine. So now let's enter into the container. Let's enter inside the container and we'll check whether it's been changed or not. So for that, docker exec it and SQL db1 and bin bash. So cd, it's var, let me check that, it's var lib by MySQL. Yeah, ls, here it is, here it is, features1.python. This is how it will be useful. That's why I was saying the best use case for this is to update the source code, or if you want to add some files from your host machine, some changes from your host machine into the container. So this would be the best use case. So that's the reason the bind mount is always useful for, always is used for these kind of use cases, to add some changes from host machine to container. So this is one. So now even if I happen to delete this container, I should I should have this data in my host machine. Let's check this case also. So let me exit out of this and I will say docker ps. So one container is up and running, so I'll stop this container, docker stop sql db1. So I stopped it. So now I will delete this also. So docker rm SQL db1. So now let me do docker ps no container and docker psa no container at all. So now let's check the bind mount dir. So we are here only. Let me check. You see that everything remained remain, everything remained stayed, everything stayed back. So let's check. So we have checked the bind mount there, everything still there. So bind mount is mostly used to inject, that's the main use case of this. So bind mount is mostly used to inject data from host machine to the container, like the code developers code developers are writing, and so while the container is running, so they can do all the code changes in the host machine directory, and they will be reflected in the container when they push it to the when they just it's not pushing also. If you just write it in your host machine directory, which is bind mounted with the directory inside the container, that's it, all will be reflected. Okay, so that's the main use case of it.